Hello, welcome to my channel. My name's Katie, I'm a mixed media sketchbook artist, and today I'm testing out some new art supplies. Today I'm going to be testing out Faber Castell Gelatos, so I'm going to start with how I got them, the pricing and the availability, as well as what they are before I go into swatching them and showing you how you can use them in your sketchbook. So as a mixed media artist, I do use quite a lot of things. I use a lot of paint, I use Neocolors, pencils, but one thing which I have recently started to get into is Faber Castell Gelatos. Now I used to use these years and years ago. I had a set of the yellow and orange ones and also the blue and purple ones. And they were quite big back then in like the scrapbooking and journaling world as like creating a mixed media background base. But it's only recently that I've started seeing other artists like Emma Carlisle, TJ Marston and Omar Wynne use Faber Castell Gelatos in their sketchbooks. So the colours that I had from years and years ago weren't quite right, so I've been scouring the second-hand sites, waiting for a bigger set to come available. I really love buying art materials second-hand. You'll know that if you've seen my auction art supply video, but basically the prices on Amazon and other places are really high. The set that I got, which is this one, a set of 28, and this is the gifting set, so it does come with like sponges and blending things. Resellers are selling these for about £100, and for me that is a ridiculous amount of money. I think that is really steep, so I just tried to be patient and I kept looking on Facebook Marketplace and Vinted, and I managed to get this brand new set of 28 for just £40. And that included the postage, so I was really chuffed. So I definitely recommend, if you did want to try these after watching this review video, to check your second-hand sites because I think you can get a good bargain. And for me, it was definitely worth that price. So what exactly are Faber Castell Gelatos? They are like a paint stick. I've seen them talked about as like tempera paint sticks, and I know that you can also get a lot cheaper versions. I think Del Green do a version, which I haven't tried, but I have obviously tested these out. They come in these little plastic cases and they twist up, so they're kind of like a lipstick. I've seen them described as that quite a lot, and I've had a lot of questions asking if they're like Neocolors. So you'll see in the video that I do test them out against a really cheap brand and also the Neocolors, because although they blend and are similar, they are very different in their texture. They're extremely soft, which is why the lipstick comparison comes in, because they definitely don't feel as hard as the Neocolors, which are like a crayon. These are definitely more creamy, and I'd say they're more like the Sennelier oil pastels in terms of the buttery feeling when you are putting them on the page. So like really soft oil pastels, and you'll also see in the swatching and the blending that they do create that little bit of like pigment coming off. But I'm going to explain all that and show you in more closer detail how they work in the next section of this video. You can also use them on textiles and other surfaces, but as I said, I'm a sketchbook artist, so I'm just going to be using them in my sketchbook for today. These are water soluble, so they're very versatile, and I definitely think that there's a lot that I can use them for. So without further ado, let's get into using them in my sketchbook and swatching them out. Okay, let's start with swatching. So I'm just going to go in the order that they're all in the box. Sometimes when you're swatching, I feel like the pigments of like some pencils and like the leads are different, but I'm expecting these to all feel the same. So I'm just going to work in order. I'm not doing huge swatches, but I will leave some space underneath to add my water. These are obviously water soluble, so I think it'll be really interesting to see how they react when I add the water underneath. I've seen a lot of people describe them as like lipsticks, which I definitely agree with. They're extremely soft to go down. I think that they wear down quite quickly. They are very soft. But they put a lot of pigment down on the page. But I have unscrewed these before, and it does come out quite a lot. I'd say about that much, which is a lot more than I expected. So I do think these will last quite a good while. We are moving into the glittery ones of this pack. Now I probably won't use these metallic-y ones. I can see that there's a definite sheen on these, but it's not too bad at the moment. I wonder when I add water if that sort of shine will show through more, because for me I don't use much metallic in my work. But these are really bright. There's a really great saturation to these. This is the gold. I would say that it doesn't necessarily match the colour of the barrel. Some of these colours are more accurate than others, but specifically on this gold you can see that it's a lot more yellow on the barrel in the plastic than it is in the swatch. So I think having a swatch page is really helpful with art supplies because you can't really rely sometimes on the actual barrel that it comes in. And the silver. And now we're back onto the normal colours. So that's a really hot fuchsia pink. Again, I would say that's not very accurate. This looks more purple toned, whereas this is definitely more pink toned. Some of these colours are really nice though. They are definitely brighter than I'd normally go. I find that with a lot of art supplies, if I'm buying a multi-pack, there might be some colours that I wouldn't normally go for. But I was really impressed with the price of these, and there are certainly some colours that I know I can blend and will use. There's just also other ones that are probably a bit too bright for my style. So this pack, I'd say there is a really good range of colours, and I think that will help with the blending as well. It would be nice if there were a few more bluey turquoises. We've got the turquoise in the metallic, but I'd also like to see maybe a few more reds. We've just got this sort of one red and then a couple of oranges, but I think a few more reds, maybe some more browns as well would be nice. This is probably the colour that I'd use the most. This is the olive. They do feel very similar. They're all going down with the same consistency. This green is one that I wouldn't use. That's quite neon. And this one's more like the greens I use in my landscapes. I think we'll just get this on this one page on the left as well, which is good. I think a really nice light blue would be better. This is quite a dark, I would say a mid-tone blue. I'd like to see a lot lighter one. Some of these are leaving quite a lot of pigment. This one in particular is really, really soft. You can see there, it's brought up a lot of pigment, so it's like sitting on top, and it's really worn away really fast there. So I think some of these are softer than others, and that will mean they'll wear down quicker. So the last one in this one, which is this purple. That's a really dark purple, darker than on the plastic. So these do react to water. They are similar to Neocolor IIs in that respect, but they are a lot softer. But I'll compare those together later. I'm just going to go through this and add some water to our swatches. So it does sit on the page quite a lot. I'd say it's harder to pick up. So you can see there where it's like leaving that initial mark that I've put down. It's still bringing pigment up, but I'd say it's not blending it very well. I think I could work in a little bit more just to make that a little bit less obvious. But it doesn't pick up the whole thing at first. It needs a little bit of work to get that pigment off from that initial mark. Here we're onto the metallics. So I think it depends on the light, whether you're picking up some of the sheen. I think in some lights it's more obvious. And we'll also see how they look when they're dried as well. At the moment that gold kind of just looks like a beige, and like a browny beige. So it'll be interesting if I'll be able to use that and it doesn't have a huge amount of sort of sheen and glittery effect to it. I'm cleaning my brush as I go as well. Oh, interestingly, this one's probably got the worst amount of pigment. I'm not getting much pigment off of that. This red. It's definitely got that's a cool tone red, I'd say. It would be nice to have a few more shades. There are translucent gelatos as well that you can get, but they're very pricey here in the UK. Interestingly, that one came straight off, so you can't see the initial marks I put down there. And same with that yellow, so perhaps with that pigment it's definitely very different to the top ones, where maybe it's because they're still a little bit wet. Oh no, it's not doing it on that olive. So that's interesting. I'm not using a huge amount of water, just dipping my brush slightly and wiping it off each time. Some of them definitely feel more pigmented than others. Okay, there we go. So on some of these you can really see where I've put down that initial colour, and where I've added the water it hasn't really blended it. It's kind of just taken a bit of that pigment, but you can really see the circle of colour I've put down first. And then the only ones where it's subtle is the yellows. So especially that brighter yellow, you can't see my initial marks, which is interesting. So on this spread I want to try some blending. So let's start dry. I'm going to just use light yellow, the orange, and then the red. So I've skipped out two of the in-between shades because I want to see how they blend together. and just see how soft and buttery they blend. It layers really nicely, I can feel that. This paper stock isn't textured at all, but you can still see I'm getting a little bit of that textured effect. And then go back over with that yellow. I want a really nice smooth blend and just see how far we can push it. But that's really nice, that's blended really nicely. You can see a little bit of the colour does pick up because they are so soft, so that's just something to think about if you were then putting this on something else, that it will take that colour with it. And we'll end on the red. And I'll come back in with the orange. So I think because they are so soft, they do blend really, really nicely. I really like that. You can see a really clean blend there. But yes, here it's really picked up. So you'd have to clean that off, I think, in between each session, just to keep things nice and clean and neat so things don't get too muddy. So next up, what I want to do is I'm going to put down my colours. So the exact same colours I had above. So there's the light yellow, the orange, and the red. Actually, these do have specific names. So this one's red cherry. They've all got individual names on the lid. And then I'm going to grab a wet brush. I'll start with the yellow and just work my way along the page. Just going to come back and try and smooth that out, similar to how I did it above. Okay, so it does change the tone a little bit. This paper doesn't hold wet media massively well, so you can see there's a bit of pilling. But that's interesting. So they blend together really nicely with the water. What I'm interested in is also seeing how they compare to Neocolor IIs. So the Neocolor IIs are definitely a lot harder, but let me just grab a colour which is similar to what I've got. So let's grab these yellows, and I just want to put this on the page. So this is more like a crayon, it's a lot harder than these. I don't have to push as hard to get the pigment down. I can also sharpen these where I wouldn't do that for this because it's just too soft. So if you want sharper lines, you can get that with the Neocolors, but not with the Faber Castell. Although you can use the edge just for line work like that. They're not super, super soft that you can't do that. And I haven't sharpened this one, but I'd say you've got a little bit more control with the Neocolor IIs. And I also want to see how it blends. So same yellow with the Neocolor and same yellow with the gelato. And let's mix that with a blue. So I'll put down a bit more actually. So I'll pick these two shades, which are quite similar to me. So with the Neocolor I'm going on top. It feels like it's sort of sitting on top rather than blending in. Let's see how this one does. That feels like it's blending a bit more. Again, it's picking up the yellow on the nib, but quite similar there. I would say that this one feels like it's blending because it is quite thick. So if I do a smudge test on the top one, it's barely, I can get a little bit of pigment on my finger, but not much. Let's do the same test underneath with the gelatos. Oh yes, you can really see that there. So that's really smudgy and blendy because you're getting a lot more pigment on the paper, whereas I can feel this feels a little bit tacky, whereas the Neocolors don't. So that's interesting. A definite difference there. The other thing that I wanted to test is the cheaper version that I tried out a few months ago, and that was these. So I bought these as like expecting them to be a cheap version of the Neocolor IIs, which they weren't. And this is a German brand by Ideen mit Hers. And for me, these felt a lot more like the gelato. So I'll be interested to see how they compare now that I have the actual real Faber Castell ones. I will link the video where I was using these and comparing them to the Neocolor IIs. And there is a lot more plastic in here. Let's pick out similar colours. So I'll pick out a pink and a pink from here. So I just want to do a quick test to see the difference. As you can see, this one's got a lot more lid compared to the gelatos. And these ones are kind of sharpened, but once they're not sharpened, I don't think it's worth sharpening them yourself. And this one is like a flat. I did undo these. You get quite a bit in here, but not more than this. I'd say about the same. but these ones are a lot longer. I'm not going to unscrew this because I did that with one of them and I couldn't get them back in. Okay, so we'll try with the cheaper German brand. Okay, so that feels really, really buttery soft. That's really interesting actually. So I would say this is even softer. This is like painting with butter. Whereas this one, you can see there's definitely resistance there. So I'm applying the exact same amount of pressure there. And you can really see how much pigment's gone down. I'm going to do that underneath as well, but I'm going to press as hard as I can and then add water. So that's wearing that down pretty quickly as well. And then this one. So I have to press a lot harder to get the same amount of pigment on the page. This one, I can feel there's like a waxiness onto the Faber Castell compared to the cheaper German brand. There's a lot less there. This feels more waxy and really sticky actually. Let's add some water as well. Let's see what happens there. Okay, so there is more pigment coming up with the Faber Castell. It feels more like paint, so I can see that it is bringing up a colour onto my paintbrush, whereas this one's kind of just using what's on there. And again, that's because there was more pigment sitting on the page. So there's the result there. And the full result from the page. So this isn't quite dry, but you can see the blending I think works better when it's dry actually. I think it's better to blend dry and then add water than blend them separately with water because I can see where the colours end. So that was a really helpful test. And before we move on to creating some actual art, I just do want to see how a pencil layers on top of these that I've got down. So this was the Neocolor and a white pencil. Kind of just scratches in. Oh, interesting. It lays much better on top of the gelatos. And then this is the gelato wet and dry. That's still a little bit wet. And that's the cheaper brand. Let's put it on here as well. And then the darker one as well. So it doesn't go over the Neocolor at all. And that's something I always find with Neocolors. But it does go over a little bit better with the gelatos. You definitely see more of the colour there. It layers over the dry really well. Let's go on this wet one, and this one, and this one. You can see where it's not going over the Neocolor. So I definitely say that the cheaper German brand of those crayons are similar, except for with the lightness of touch. You can see a huge difference there where I was putting a lot more pigment on the page. And there's a lot more pigment on my brush from that one. But in terms of the pencil going over, it's similar. But with the Neocolor, it just won't go over. So that's really interesting. And I'm definitely going to play with that in our next few tests where I'm going to be creating some actual pieces of art with the Faber Castell Gelatos. So there are a few different ways that I want to use the gelatos. I have switched to a different sketchbook, so this is my Strathmore Mixed Media sketchbook, the 500 series, just because I want to use a bit more water and I know this sketchbook can handle it a bit better. First up, we're going to do some more experiments with the dry blending, then we'll do wet blending, and then I'm going to use my paper palette and try it on there and use it as sort of like a paint. Now I did notice in the box it came with like a blending stick and also a sponge. So I'm going to try that when I'm testing the dry blending with this first drawing. So I'm going to do a page of fruit. So I'm going to start with my base colour. I'm going to pick this buttercream colour. They do have really nice names. I really like the names. So I'm going to try and add on lots of different colours just to try and amp up the colour on this pear. This is a slightly more textured paper, and I can feel it sort of on top of it, but it doesn't feel much different, so I'm surprised by that. They are a bit messy, so I was just trying to clean off a little bit that fell off, and it's not like the neatest of mediums. Let's add in some green. I'm still being a little bit delicate with these. Start blending this in. I think like you could go really wild with these, and like you could do a base layer of like maybe a forest scene. That would work really nicely. I'm gonna add in some pink as well. Hopefully it will look like a pear by the end of this. And it'd be nice if I had a bit more of a warmer red shade. Come in with this orange instead. Now let's see if we can blend these things in. Let's use this, I think this is just paper, rolled up paper. Let's see how that works. So I probably need a bit more pigment down because it's definitely working better in the areas where there's more on the page. It's creating a really nice smooth blend, which is nice. Let's come back in with some more colours and just try and build this up and see how far we can take it. There's a highlight here on this pear which I've left with just the page underneath, but I do have this white, so let's put that in. Well, that's nice, that's layered really nicely. And then this line's a bit harsh, so let's try and smooth that out. I'm just going to go on top. I think it's helpful to have like a neutral sort of colour that you can use to blend the rest that's on the page. I'm just going to try and tidy up this edge. So I can see it's starting to pick up a lot of the pigment, and I've got to be careful not to make this too muddy. You can see there where the blender's really picking up that colour. So let's add on a little bit of the detail. Now, as you saw, I can't get super defined detail because they're not sharp, but you can use the edge of it, so I think that's worked okay. I'm also going to see how pencils layer on top on this one. So obviously we did do a test compared to the Neocolor, and I think it works better than the Neocolors. So let's see if we can just add in a few of these little dots. So where it's really thick, it doesn't really make a mark. It does sort of scratch away a little bit. So that's interesting. I quite like that technique. Let's use that there. I'm just going to try and neaten this off a little bit. So I'm going into the white there with the pencil. So it kind of scratches it off, but it does sit on a lot better. It doesn't really scratch off with the Neocolors, but you can see there where it's picking it up. It's really taking off the pigment I've already put down on the page. Okay, so I think that's it for my first pair. So that's all dry blending. So I'm going to pop down some little colour swatches and then we'll do some wet blending. So I'm going to do a different fruit over here. I'm going to do an apple, but it's similar colours. So I'm going to start off with that buttercream colour again. And I think it just helps. There's still a bit of colour on here, so it's not super clean. So that's definitely something to think about. So this is going to be quite a large apple. And there's a hint of green there. So these feel really fun to play with. I'm really enjoying the texture. It's a lot softer than Neocolors, so I would say that they're not comparable because they are so different in the feeling of them. I do wish that there was a warmer toned red than this cherry red. Let's see what we can do. There's a lot of smaller markings, so I might come in with my pencils there. This is going to be blended with the water, so that will be really interesting. I'm just going to put the colours down first. We need to make this a bit more green to make it more apple-like. So I've got to be careful not to make it too muddy. But let's keep it at that for now, and now let's add our water and see how it blends like this. So I'm going to start in the lightest areas. It does create a really thick amount of pigment, which is similar to Neocolors, but I think it's easier to get the pigment up with this. But I'm using quite a good amount of water here. The paper's holding it better as well. I can still see some of the marks I've put down. You have to use quite a lot of water and quite a lot of force to get rid of those initial marks. You can see it's really creating a paint. So it'll be interesting when I put it onto my paint palette and see in the next exercise how it copes. So there's a lot of little marks on top of this. So that's it blended wet. And now I wouldn't say that the blending is very good, but it does create a totally different feel and totally different vibe to the ones where I blended dry. So very different, a lot more wetter, a lot more watercolory, but you can still see my initial marks. So I'm going to do the same as the pear and just add on a little stalk. Maybe I'll do a leaf above as well. Oh, actually, I think it'll be interesting. I wonder what would happen if I put down water first and then applied the gelato on top of that. So let's try that here. Let's pretend that there's going to be a leaf there. Now you do need to use paper that can handle the water like this. So I wouldn't say the Royal Talons could. Oh, that's a really nice technique. You can see how it kind of spreads out. It's very similar to watercolour in that respect. but you can still see the texture from those initial marks. So that's really fun. A different way to use these. Add in another colour. It's really merging with the water nicely. I'm going to come in with my paintbrush just to soften some of these. It feels more like watercolour here in that I can manipulate it a little bit more. I mean, I don't think this is going to be the best apple in the world, but it's really helpful for just playing and experimenting. And doing it this way just creates more texture. So this is a similar technique where it's not dried yet. I'm kind of scratching it off. So what I'm going to do is let this dry and come back to it and go on to our next experiment. Okay, so I'm going to do a peach next, but instead of applying the gelatos to the page, I'm going to put them onto my palette and create a few different colours. So this is a tear off paper palette. I use these all of the time. There's a little hint of green, so let's pop that on there. And then there's like a reddy, orangey, mauvey colour. Just putting these down as if I'm squeezing out paint, and I can also blend them together on the palette, but I think I'll do that mostly with my brush. Then a bit of the purple and a bit of this. Oh, I'm not sure if I'll use that, so maybe I'll be able to mix it in with something else. And I can always add to this. I'm just going to put these colours down for now. So I've got my tear off palette here, and I'm just going to wet my paintbrush. Oh, that works really well. Let's try it on these other ones as well. So I'm kind of creating my own sort of watercolour paint there, using the gelatos. Let's now apply that to our sketchbook page. So similar with how I started with the others, I'm going to just begin with my lightest colour and try and get the shape of the peach. Now this way, because I'm sort of putting the pigment down on a separate palette first, it means I won't have any of those harsher lines that I need to blend, because the blending's being done as I go. So we've got the peach shape here, and then it does go a bit warmer up here. Now if you are doing this, then of course you could put down your sketch lines first. Just going to need a bit more of this colour, so I'm just going to add it straight to my palette. A bit of green. So this just feels like I'm using watercolour. It's a little bit less pigmented than some colours would be, but it's creating a much softer effect than applying it straight to the page. So again, it's a very different technique, but I think you can get sort of the blending a little bit more. And we've got a really dark area here. And not having those sort of lines where I was applying the colour to the page, it works really well for this peach because it's kind of creating that softness and that furry skin. You could also like blot it with some paper. I'm just going to build up some more of that colour. I think there's a little bit more of a chance of it getting a little bit muddier. And just warm that up a bit. So I'm going to add on the little stem. Again, I'll just use the colours I've got on my palette and mix up a brown. I'm going to add that on. Oh, that's a nice, I really like it when that happens with watercolour. So it's nice to see that happen here. It does feel like I'm using watercolour at this point. So this will take a while to dry, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to let this dry and then come back and we can add on our coloured pencils, and I'll add on my swatches as well. So here's how it looks now that it's dried, and I'm just going to come in with my coloured pencils just to finish this off. It has dried a lot lighter than it went down, which is interesting to see, and I really like the textures. So it kind of created a wrinkly texture. It's definitely more like watercolour at this point. And that works really well for this peach, just because it doesn't have that feeling anymore of like stickiness or waxiness. The only one that does at the moment is the one that's been blended dry. So adding the water definitely takes away some of that sort of stickiness and that sticky texture. There's still quite a lot of pigment on here, so the pencil actually isn't layering as much as I thought. It has had quite a long time to dry, so it's not that it's still wet. I don't know if that's the paper. It still sort of feels like it's not layering as much as it would if it was just on the paper. But I really like the technique. I think that's definitely going to be an interesting way to use it going forward. I can definitely layer a lot easier than if it was wet, which was just sort of picking off the paper, the pigment of the Faber Castell, whereas this time it's definitely sitting a bit better. But a really nice gradient on there. That was a really nice technique. I did just want to go back to the apple, and I'm just going to add on a few more marks now that that's dry. It does go on to the bits where it's dried, but over here you can really see where it's kind of still picking up that pigment, and that's just because of the thickness, I think. You can see it's really coming up. So some of it feels like it's completely smooth, but some of it definitely is still picking up with the pencil. I can't layer the pencil over this, and I think that's where it's still quite thick. It has to be quite watered down, as we've seen with the peach, for it to actually layer over the top. The coloured pencil is certainly not going over where it's thicker. It's only going over where it was watered down. So yeah, you can see it's more like the Neocolors there in terms of going over it. I really like the texture though. I think this will be good for scratching into. Really different techniques and really different textures from all three of these experiments. I would say that it's a little bit messy. So there are areas of the page where I've smudged it, and there's also bits where I've accidentally had it on my hand and put it onto the white paper. So I'll show you that now too. So that kind of reminds me more of oil pastels, and I'd say that the texture definitely feels more oily and pastel-y, but obviously compared to oil pastels, these are actually water soluble. I did just want to show you a close-up of the metallic shimmery sort of swatches. So it's tricky to show you in the light, but you can definitely see them reflecting a little bit more and having that sort of shine to them compared to the completely matte standard colour ones. So you can kind of see in specific lights where it does have that sheen, but I'll probably stick with the other colours. So I'm going to do a wrap up of my thoughts now that we have swatched them and used them all in my sketchbook. I would say they're a really great base layer. I definitely think the layering is tricky when they are really thick, but obviously you can water them down, which is similar to the Neocolors. But I do think that the pencils and things layer better on these than they do the Neocolor base. I just think that there's loads of options here, so a really versatile art supply. I didn't show how you can be a lot looser with them. The fruit illustrations I did create were definitely a lot tighter and smaller, and I think that one of the things that these will be good at, and I didn't show, is to just be looser, really play around with them and mix them up on the page. And I do use them a little bit more in that way in next week's video, so keep your eyes peeled for that. As you saw in the video, I do think that they're more of an oil pastel texture, so if I was to compare them, they're less like Neocolors and more like oil pastels, except they are water soluble. Comparing to the really cheap German brand that I did have, I would say that the colour payoff and the pigmentation is a lot stronger, and I definitely prefer the texture of these. They're still soft and they do wear down, but they're not as soft. But they're still really fun to play with, and I'm really glad that I picked this set up. I think I'm going to have a lot of fun layering them, using them with all of my mixed media, and just getting a little bit looser and freer in my sketchbook. So if you do have these Faber Castell Gelatos, please do share in the comments how you use them, because like I say, there are loads of different ways and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope you found this video helpful if you were looking at buying these, and I definitely recommend looking at second-hand sellers because you can definitely get them a lot cheaper. Thank you for watching. A huge thank you to my patrons for allowing me and supporting me to make these videos, and I hope you have a creative week. I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later.